about how you are interacting with the material. And I think particularly sometimes for like particularly white folks in conversations about white supremacy, like it's really easy for us to be like, oh, well, I don't do that. That's not me. I'm different. What I'm asking you is to set all of that aside and really think about the ways in which you do like interact with and the ways that you do benefit from white supremacy. So really like challenging yourself in that regard. So confidentiality, I know a lot of us know each other. Wisconsin is a small state. And I think like Wisconsin Student Affairs is even smaller. And so one of the things that I ask for in confidentiality is that, you know, some folks might share some things here. And I think that like it is important for us to like let this space be learning and to not like gatekeep knowledge. Like let's not participate in like cancel culture, right? Like let's think about like how we are all people, like all what we have 57 participants in here, like we are all working on a problem, right? We're like all part of a team working on a problem. And that's the way that I like to think about this. Number 3 is empathy. I think that's self-explanatory. Of open mind, again, I think that that is explanatory. Participation, you know, I like to offer on participation, like participate in whatever way benefits you or works the best for you. Some people are fervent, you know, users of the chat, or like audio, you know, like people like to talk, people like to out loud process. Some people like to take notes, some people won't say anything. And I think all of those options are fine. Do whatever you need to do to like engage in the material. Part of what participation is for me too, is how you interact and engage with the material like after we're done. So, you know, what I'm sharing this with you all like for use in this space, but even more importantly, specifically for use outside of it, right? So I think participation extends past the session that we're in today and into the future. And then respect. I think that that one is self-explanatory as well. One of the things that I like to talk about in respect though too is, you know, often when I do workshops about like white supremacy or identity or, you know, anything, I like to add that I think part of respect is believing marginalized folks of like as accurate reporters of our own experiences. So like there might be a moment where like I am talking about like trans misogyny, right? Like, and you know, sometimes people will like to sort of Nancy Drew it and try to figure out if what I'm actually experiencing is trans misogyny, right? Like, and that's really not our jobs, right? Like we aren't the Hardy Boys, like we are just going to let people like be accurate reporters of their own experiences. And so when people are telling you that they're experiencing like trans misogyny, anti-Blackness, right, like believe them. So does anyone have anything that they would like to add to these? Anything that is feeling like really burning for folks or really salient that they would like to and need to add? Or does anyone have any concerns about the guidelines that I offered? Okay, well, if at any time anything comes up, please let me know. One thing that I like about Zoom is that I can see the chat in presenter mode. So like if you want to chat me directly, you can just do that. Okay, also, every time I do a workshop, learning objectives. So I like to tell you all what my learning or objectives are for this presentation, what I hope that you take away from and what you will. And these are sort of like the guiding principles of the session today and like where we're starting and where we're going, right? Like sort of where we're ending. So one of them is like, I want you to be able to reflect on your current workplace and how that may perpetuate a culture of white supremacy through its policies, procedures, practices. Identify ways to support multiply marginalized, that should say folks, multiply marginalized folks and strengthen relationships with the people you work directly with. Assess the needs of the most marginalized in our communities and explore action steps that you can take back to challenge/change those policies, procedures, and practices we sort of mentioned in the first bullet. So really, like, the learning objectives for us today is to be able to like reflect, identify, assess, and explore, right? Those are sort of really the action words that come out of this. And like, I think these things are really important, particularly the exploring action, and we'll like work on that at the end. But yeah. So just sort of as a primer for what we're talking about today, I like to sort of start conversations about white supremacy as really talking about it as a concept, right? I think often we really conceptualize white supremacy as like action, and it is, but it's not just action, right? Like, white supremacy isn't just like Proud Boys or KKK. Like, white supremacy is much more encompassing than that, right? Like, it takes much more forms. It is about like a system. It's about values. It's about like culture. It's about everything, right? Like, white supremacy informs everything that we know about anything, right? And so the ways in which like white supremacy shows up is it shows up in the constant marginalization of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? So like, and that can happen through a lot of different avenues, but you can think about it in terms of like how your policies and procedures really sort of reflect the thoughts and beliefs of white, straight, cisgender, able-bodied Christian folks, and how this sort of like pervasive establishment of white Eurocentrism really positions dominant identities as normative and therefore superior, right? So like an example that I can think of is, you know, I have worked in a residence life department where sort of like procedure in working with students, right? Like, let's say if a student is talking to their community advisor, their resident assistant or whatever about, you know, like experiencing suicidal ideation. And the sort of first step in that sort of response and procedure for that RA is to call the police. And that is sort of like true for most situations. Like, crisis response and all first response comes from police. Like, I'm positioning that as like white supremacy culture, right? Particularly because of the ways in which like police historically and contemporarily have perpetrated white supremacy and anti-Blackness in the form of like police brutality and lots of other methods. So like, white supremacy, like, and like that's an action, right? But it's not an action in the way that we think about like it being in relationship to, you know, the KKK, et cetera, right? It's just the ways in which we sort of like value like dominant identities as normative, right? And so that is what I'm talking about when I talk about white supremacy, right? It's like this like concept and this action. So what I'm going to do right now to sort of further drive this point is I am going to share something in the chat, and this we will need this for the rest of the session. So I just sent it in the chat, should have went to everyone. It's a PDF that's entitled White Supremacy Culture. And so what this PDF is it is like I sort of like copy and pasted this into like a PDF. It's from a workbook for social change groups by Kenneth Jones and Timo Kuhn. And so they talk about exactly what we're talking about today, right? They sort of like list some of the like features, feels like not the right word, but some of the ways in which like white supremacy culture like shows up in our workplace, and then some of the antidotes for it. So what I would like is if Tanya, could we sort of move into breakout rooms? And so what I would like for everyone to do is look at this PDF, and in your breakout rooms, sort of talk about ones that you not resonate with, I don't think that that's right, but ones that maybe like surprise you. What are your reactions to this? If you've seen it before, or if you haven't, what does this make you think about? What are some of the things that you see yourself doing or perpetuating? Like what things are surprising for you? What things are you feeling resistant to? So sort of talk about all of those things in your breakout rooms, and then we will come back in a couple of minutes.
How long, Lee, would you like me to have them in their breakouts?
Oh, are they timed?
I can time them, yes.
Ooh, okay. Let's do about 10 minutes, I think.
10, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna open all rooms now.
Should we just have a conversation here?
I was just gonna say, is that okay if this group just goes ahead and has a conversation? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks to Amber for bringing it up the first time. Appreciate it. Let's talk, friends. I would love to model and go first. My name is Margia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of residence life at Viterbo in La Crosse, Wisconsin. In this little PDF, one of the things that really stood out to me is this very last one on page 9 about the right to comfort and how folks believe that they have this right to a space where they are emotionally and physiologically feel safe. And then they like use that to scapegoat onto other folks if they feel that discomfort. It's a conversation that I think a lot of folks, when I try to have conversations about white supremacy, it's uncomfortable. And I think people avoid it because they believe they have that right to comfort.
This is a lot of information. I feel like I almost need 10 minutes to read it.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I work in admissions and I use she, her pronouns. I kind of identified with the fear of open conflict a lot. I definitely like to I'm a people pleaser and I like to try to make sure everybody's feeling okay. And so sometimes I had noticed I would gloss over different issues of discomfort. And at my university, we have what we call diversity dives. And so I've made sure to go to every one of those and just be open to feelings and letting things be uncomfortable. So.
My name is Joanne Stacy. I'm also at Viterbo University. I'm the area coordinator. One thing that I really identified with, and I think that our students also probably identify with or struggle with, is perfectionism, especially that last bit that says the tendency to identify what's wrong, the ability to identify, name, and appreciate what's right. That we're just, especially with everything that's going on right now, I think people have that tendency to be like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and it's all unfair, right? So that's something that I see. I think that crosses, it crosses over pretty easily to residents' life.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Schmidt. I resonated with the defensiveness area. I think that's a really natural reaction to being confronted or just kind of called out on anything. I would say this is a very regular occurrence on the UW-Madison campus, the being called out, which is great. We want to know how people are perceiving things and experiencing things and want to hear that feedback. I think that we do tend to sort of just put out statements, of support, which are good and very helpful, but our students want action. They don't want to hear another statement about how we support them when they don't feel supported on our campus. So I think the defensiveness comes out in some of our statements, and we need to focus on action.
Hi, I'm Amber Schiesel, and my home base is Concordia University, Wisconsin, and I resonate with sense of urgency. I think that universities can feel a lot of pressure to do a lot of diversity and inclusion training, and instead of thinking about what this looks like for us long term and how can we really affect lasting change, we do quick like one-offs, like, oh, well, we did a training, so we're good and we look good. And then attending those trainings, I feel like I have to like memorize everything that I'm learning, rather than feeling like this is going to be something that will be an ongoing discussion, forever. So there can be a lot of pressure, I think, on both sides.
Other things that stick out to you on the PDF?
Still reading it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I thought Lee did a nice job of talking about how you don't have to be a member of a white supremacist group to actually be a part of the white supremacy culture. I don't know about everyone else, but my reading choices have changed greatly in the past 7 months. And I can't remember if it was being an anti-racist or white fragility, but giving those examples of like, oh, well, I'm not racist because I'm not in the KKK. And just like really helping us identify that we are part of white supremacy systems that benefit us. And that's sort of the first step, is sort of acknowledging it and then realizing how you can use your privileges to try to dismantle those systems and make them more inclusive for everyone.
Hi, this is Mary. Can you hear me? All right, awesome. I was trying to get my audio to work. Changes from home, it works, work it doesn't. So Mary Russell, I'm with UW-Madison as well with the Wisconsin Union. And I think two things that, as I was trying to quickly read through as well, the paternalism part of, and I know we struggled with that a lot with the Wisconsin Union, of not understanding who is making decisions about things. And especially as our university, we have a newer division of student affairs, and the union is now under that, which has changed our structure, and people don't quite understand, like, is our director making decisions? He's also associate vice chancellor. Is our other chancellor making decisions? Like, how is that all happening? And then people feel left out of the process. And then just real quickly, I see we're almost done. Individualism, and if anyone hasn't listened to the Michelle Obama podcast, I'd highly recommend that. And she and Barack talked a lot in one of her episodes about this whole idea of individualism and how that is such a culture of the US, and how, especially of white people, we're expected to go out and do everything on our own and not bring others in with us, and how that can create issues and problems in different areas and neighborhoods and processes and systems. So that, all those stuck out for me.
Thanks, Mary. I'm gonna close out the rooms now. I appreciate you sharing. Thank you all for the discussion.
It's really fun to like just watch everyone pop back up, and then this screen just is like shoving everyone all over the place, and my eyes are like, ugh! Okay. So welcome back. I'm gonna go ahead and throw up my screen again. And this is just the slide that we sort of left off on, and then I have one that just is like this blank slide to sort of like serve as a like as a transition slide. So I would love to hear, and do people have the ability to share audio, like the participants? They do? Okay.
They do.
Perfect. So I would like for folks to share what they talked about in their breakout rooms, or, you know, if like just share any of the thoughts that they had. You're welcome to do that in chat. You're welcome to use audio. Yeah, I'm just really curious about, you know, what came up for folks. Maybe what was surprising to them about this document in particular, maybe some of the things that you're resistant to. Yeah, I would just love to hear what people's thoughts are. And I'm gonna open the chat so I can see it.
In our chat, hi, Rachel. In our chat, we talked about how the pandemic is really showing us how deep our white supremacist cultures are within our structures. Even when I'm thinking about my department and how much work we were doing when it came to social justice work and trying to decolonize our work or, try to just be more inclusive overall. Now that the pandemic has come back, it's like we're falling back into our white supremacist tendencies of urgency. Everything is urgent. It also has to always be perfect. And there's no grace because we have to have everything right all the time. And it just seemed like everything built off of itself. And I think all of it was really eye-opening, especially to think about it right now. And to think about how in order to survive this pandemic, we're falling back into all of this, the things that were listed in this worksheet, which are not great because I think that we are inherently like removing feelings and emotions and like individualized experiences when we're talking about helping people get through this pandemic, whatever that means. So just a few thoughts from our group. Number 7.
Breakout group 7. Yeah, I mean, that is something that we also talked in my breakout room 5. Like, this pandemic has really shown, well, and I think something that is interesting to me is, I think this pandemic has really shown, maybe only for white folks, the ways in which white supremacy is like really pervasive, right? Like, I think that it has shown things that is always there. And I'm saying that not to say that like, I need you to think about this. I'm just saying like, I think for me, that's like my experience, right? And that like the sense of urgency in particular, like one of the things that we were talking about is in our breakout room is in student affairs, like urgency is really like almost used as currency, right? Like we really, really value the ways in which we can respond to crisis all the time. Like we're fast, we make these decisions, we do all of these things. And we really fall into this trap because, when we make decisions really quickly and without a lot of time or thought or care, like we just make, like our decision-making process is really influenced by like our dominance, right? So that means that we don't make equity-minded decisions when we don't give ourselves time to do those things. And, there are a lot of things about the pandemic that require like quick, swift response, but I think that we have sort of fell into a panic mode and put ourselves in a place where we don't need to be. And so one of the things that I think that like we all could do, and I think like we should do moving forward, is really question why we're making decisions so quickly. Like just introduce time into the decision-making process. I think it's even more important now. And I think too, when thinking about productivity, particularly in its relationship to the way that you talked about, like everything has to be perfect, like we are using measures of productivity from a world that just does not exist anymore. And even those measures of productivity were bad. And so I encourage folks, particularly folks who supervise people in this group, to really think about how, or just to reconceptualize the way that you think about productivity. And I think that there's a lot of really great material in this document to help you rethink the way that you supervise. At least it's like been that for me. But yeah, thank you for sharing. We have someone in the chat that says, we discussed how because higher ed was designed for white people to benefit from, a lot of these seem quote normal instead of as red flags of white supremacy. Yeah, I think that that's true. The first time that I ever looked at this document and perfectionism was number 1, I was like, yikes. Because like I had always thought about myself as a perfectionist. And I think it's partly because I'm a Virgo, but it's mostly because I'm a white person. But like I was like, I'm a perfectionist, everything has to be perfect. And that one I really had a lot of resistance to, because I think it made me challenge the ways that I thought about perfection and measures of standards and who is default, what kind of work is valued, who is valued in a work environment. Perfectionism to me is like really like about that. Yeah, the perfectionism one is like, I mean, for me, that's one that I felt really resistant to and sticks out for me a lot. But yeah, I mean, this sense of normalcy is like really like, I think, sort of at the core of what this document is about, is really thinking about like, how are we like continuing to think about these things as normal. And one of the things too, like that this comment mentions is like how higher ed was designed for white people to benefit from, and we have designed this as normalcy. My sister is also a student affairs professional, but she and she graduated a year before me, and she told me this one thing this one time that was like, you know, if it is helpful to think about higher education as a house. And so when this house was built, it was built in a really particular way for a really specific person. And so like as higher ed sort of got older and we sort of like moved more people into this house, like the structure of the house remained the same. We just sort of placed them in this structure that was built for a really like specific use. And we just sort of put things where like we just like moved them in and set their stuff down. And like we didn't build a house that was designed for anything other than the first occupant, right? And like what is still the current occupant. And so like this house doesn't really function for the people who just moved in because it doesn't serve their needs. So like that, I mean, analogy for me has made me think about how to like not only tear down the house, right? But also like rebuild a house. And I'm not a construction worker, but I know like the foundation of a house is really, really important. And if your foundation is cracked or damaged or sliding away or rotting or whatever, the house is in mortal peril or it will fall down. The house just isn't going to work, right? And so that is the way that I've thought about higher education, is we have just moved in marginalized folks into a space that just wasn't designed for them, right? We know that. Sorry, I'm logging into my laptop. I have my PowerPoint going over here too, so I can see my notes. And so, give me 1 second, I'm so sorry. It logged me out. Does anyone have any other thoughts, additional thoughts? In the chat, in the audio. Tell me stuff. How do you feel?
I'd just like to comment how enlightening this PDF is. I did not have my finger on the pulse until now. I mean, I thought I knew, but maybe I didn't. So thank you for sharing this. This is great.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I mean, this document is, for me, has been work altering and life altering. So like anytime I can like give people this PDF, I will do that. Danielle in the chat asks, where can I find the document? You should be able to like Google, it's Dismantling Racism, a workbook for social change groups. And then if you type in white supremacy culture, a PDF of it should come up. If not, you should have the ability to download the PDF and just keep it for yourself. And if you can't do that, my contact info is at the end of this presentation, and I'd be happy to send you the PDF or any of this materials. But it looks like Angie just posted it in the chat, so thank you for that. But yeah, one of the things that I wanted to mention, if no one else is going to mention it, I'm just kidding, is paternalism. This one I think is really important for me to bring up in student affairs circles, because I see it in myself. So like, and you know, anytime we're talking about this, it's like a baby, me too, right? Like, again, like we are just all people working on the same problem. So I think one of the things that we do in student affairs that I would like for us to think about, and like us in general, right, as a field, is I think we excuse a lot of white supremacy in the form of paternalism, because we have this inherent belief that we have to like take care of students all the time, as if they're not like fully capable adults, like with the ability to take care of themselves. And like, I am not saying that in a way that's like, don't show your students care, because you just should. But I think one of the things that we do, particularly when we think about like, people always are like, to me, right, Lee, what are best practices for X identity group of students, right? Like, what are best practices, you know, what do these folks need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a mistake in that question is that we are assuming that all of these students are a monolith, right? That all exists in the same sort of existence, right? Like that all queer and trans students are a monolith, that all Black students are a monolith, all disabled folks are a monolith, right? And so like, in order to truly begin answering that question, like we really have to like assess the needs of the folks in our particular communities. And so we like, paternalism shows up in lots of ways, but particularly like when we think about best practices as being the way to support people all the time, and that like we have the knowledge to support these people in all instances all the time, and that's just not true. You know, like I have a master's degree in higher ed, and I learned theory, and I think theory can be really useful, but I think that we often fall into this trap of being like, well, I learned this in grad school, or I've learned this, and so like that means that this is true all the time, or that like I know what to do for you because like I have an MED or whatever, and like that is just not the case. And so part of what action comes out of that is like assessing, going back to learning outcomes, because sometimes I do things on purpose, right? Like assessing needs of the marginalized communities like in our community is like critical to the ways in which we support and push back on our paternalistic instincts to just like that we like know how to take care of people all the time. Yeah, relationships matter. Getting the student voice in meetings is important. Yeah, I mean, students should be included in all levels of decision making all the time. If the decision affects their relationship to anything, they should be included in it. One of the things, and I'm not saying that I do everything perfect, but one of the things that I do or have started to do that comes out of this document is with the students that I supervise. Like we have started to work together on the tasks that they do. So like instead of me like compiling a list and delegating tasks, like we both compile a list together, and then we divvy up tasks based off of like particularly what that student is interested in doing and what they have the time and capacity to do. And I like that change. I think it's cool. And I think my students like it also, because I think, what I have heard from them is that they like care about their work more because they are deciding what they're doing. And it's really important to me that they know that this job is a student job and it's part-time, and like I want them to do the things that they need to do in order to like get an education. Sometimes that like doesn't include work all the time. So like I really would suggest, and I would support you in doing that. But again, like I'm not the all-knower of everything, and I'm not like the most perfect student affairs professional in the world. So yeah. Okay, so does anyone have any thoughts before we move on?
Lee, I have a question kind of as it relates, and maybe it goes in with the paternalism too. I think one of my frustrations is I see all the time at the university setting where we see these concerns or students saying to us, hey, my group is not being recognized, or I need, you know, let's address white supremacy. And instead of addressing white people, it's okay, let's form a Black group, or let's form a multicultural group, or let's form this. And we don't, and then basically those groups are told to be like the go-to. If you have a question about white supremacy, go to this group, they'll tell you about it, or they will conduct a lecture about it. And I don't think that that is always the appropriate space for that to, you know, it doesn't necessarily then infiltrate the rest of the population that actually needs to be hearing these things. So I guess, you know, I'm just wondering how, you know, and again, it's that paternalism, right? We're saying, oh, there's a need, so we'll design a group. We have the solution, we will make a group, and then you guys can go talk about it in that group. And so we're not, again, making sure that these things get out in the open. And I don't know what we do about that. I'm not saying those groups are negative. I just think they need a different purpose. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, and you're just right. Like, we just do that. Like, we will say, well, you know, we're having a problem. And so, like, let's, and, you know, I think that, like, part of what I have thought about in relationship to this is, you know, when people do exactly what you're describing in the situation where it's like, okay, well, we, you know, this thing has happened, or we know these things are happening, or people are feeling this way. And so, like, instead of, you know, examining like how this happened, or, you know, who created the capacity for this to happen, like, let's create a multicultural group, or, you know, whatever, a multicultural committee, and like, let's just. And so I think what that signals for me is that they think about it more as like, you know, like a race problem rather than like a racism and anti-Blackness problem, right? And I think the way that I have sort of pushed back on that in my space is, you know, and I think it's really situational, but I think if you frame it as like, you know, okay, like, we can create this group, but also like this other work needs to happen, right? And I think part of something too that I have used, and like, again, like, this is just suggestions, and like, I'm not always the best at it, is like, always like question your intentions for the creation of this group. Like, I think if you really like challenge the thought process on why this group is being created, like, that might be helpful for people, you know, because I think often what happens when you ask people, well, why are you creating this group? What is the purpose? What are your intentions behind the creation of this group? It's usually like, so we can like give people the illusion of work, right? Or like, they are going to be doing all of this and it's their job to do. Well, it's not their job, right? Like, it's ours too. Because, and some people might just tell you like, I don't know, like, we're just responding. I don't really know what to do. And so, you know, I think like, again, those groups, like you said, like, aren't inherently always a negative thing, but I think it's just about like questioning intentions of establishing that group, and also like figuring out like what work they're intended to be doing, and like asking why we're not doing that ourselves, and like really sort of forming a commitment to doing that work to the people who are trying to establish this group. It's just what I've done in the past. I don't know if that would necessarily like work or is contextualized to your space, but that's just the thoughts that I have to offer. But I'm like down to talk about it more. Thank you. I see that someone says a question, what happens when you have work that needs to be done in the office, but the student doesn't want to do it? Well, I didn't plan this, except I did plan this. So the sort of next part of the presentation is I have some scenarios. I love to do scenarios. I love to do activities. I love to do stuff where we get to talk to each other. And so I am going to go, if this will work. Perfect. Okay. So again, I'd love if we could get into our breakout groups after I sort of do this with the scenario. And is there a way, I think there's a way for us to share text throughout the whole chat for everyone outside of breakout rooms. So like I can read this and then we'll have, like I'll have the ability to like chat it to other people just so they have it in their chat. But I am going to present some scenarios to you, and I would like for you in your breakout rooms to think through the scenario and think about, like I have some questions here, and I'll send you the scenario and the questions and sort of really think through the questions and talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so here's the first scenario. Courtney, she, her, hers, is a white trans mask person who supervises 3 student assistants who work hourly for 20 hours a week. Recently, during a staff meeting, student assistants voiced frustration about pay. One role, the graphic designer, is paid $10 an hour. The other 2 roles are paid at $8 an hour, and they are in charge of social media accounts for the office and management of the student food pantry. The graphic designer is a white student. The social media and food pantry roles are currently held by a queer Black trans student and a queer Latinx student. The students feel that the unfair pay is racist. Courtney explains why she disagrees, stating, quote, "The graphic design position is paid more because we hire for a specialized skill that I can't teach, whereas the other 2 roles I can teach." Courtney also explains that the racial identities of the folks in the positions are coincidental and that folks of color may be in the graphic design position in the future. The conversation is tense. Courtney explains the rationale, but ultimately leaves the conversation feeling even more frustrated. And so the questions for consideration are, what are some of Courtney's assumptions about the supervisees? Why might Courtney's supervision strategies be so ineffective? How are Courtney's strategies grounded in white supremacy? And what would you suggest Courtney change about her behavior? So in a breakout room, actually, you know what, since the session ends at 11:45, I think what we'll do is I have 2 scenarios and I'll sort of have some groups work on one and other groups work on the other. So that is the first scenario. And then the second scenario I'll read to you is Jordan, they, them, theirs, is a trans femme white woman in their late 20s who supervises 3 entry-level employees. 2 of the employees are Black and 1 of the employees is white. Lately, Jordan has been feeling like work isn't getting done. On many occasions, Jordan has entered their employees' shared office and found the supervisees with their laptops off, sitting with their hands in their laps in discussion. Jordan also sees employees working on projects that are part of hobbies or professional organizations, not work tasks, during work time. The supervision strategies Jordan has been trying don't seem to be helping. Jordan has pulled the employees into one-on-ones to talk about Jordan's concerns, and the employees act avoidant, i.e. no contact, not contributing to the conversation, and generally not engaging. When Jordan brings things up in staff meeting, so much time is spent waiting in silence for employees to respond that no work is getting delegated or completed. Jordan is starting to feel frustrated because any tasks that need to be done feel like a request that is met with resistance from staff. And so the questions are exactly the same as the first one. So I think that there's 8 breakout rooms.
I took them a little bit because we lost some folks. So
Okay.
I'm putting about 4 people in each room, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, I think that sounds great. And then I think what we'll do is we'll just divide the scenarios in between half of the groups and the other one, if that makes sense.
Do you want the same amount of time?
Yeah, let's do 10 minutes.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you. And I should be able to. Oh, breakout rooms. Oh, Tanya, if you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, if you have something, I can broadcast it to each room.
Okay, that would be great. So could you send, that is the first scenario, if you could send that.
Okay.
And then the second scenario is, I'll put this. And then let's see, okay. Oh shoot, okay. And then this is the second scenario. And then the questions are the same, it just has the names changed.
Okay. I wonder if it won't let me do, yeah, it doesn't let me do something that long.
Oh, it doesn't?
No.
Shoot.
Should I bring people back?
Would we be able to sort of divide it up into different chats? Like copy half of it and then chat and then copy the other half and then chat? Is that possible?
Yep, I can do that.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
It will go to all of them, just so you know.
I think that's okay.
Okay. Perfect.
And then could you broadcast? I think if people just choose whatever scenario they want to do, I think that that's fine.
Okay. I will do my best here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's really it's like short little pieces. It's like a couple sentences.
Oh, is that all that you can broadcast?
Yeah.
Does it show up to the chat in the thing?
I don't know how it gets broadcast to them. I'm learning all of this. Lissa, I see you're still on here. I don't know if you're actually at your desk, but she might know more than I do.
Sorry, I was just delivering meals to our quarantine kids. So what is the question?
I'm just trying to share in the chats the message, the scenarios, and I can only do like 2 sentences broadcast at a time.
Yes, so that sounds like a hard limitation that I don't know we can get around. In regards to that.
I didn't realize that if I shared in the chat to everyone, it would only do everyone that is here, not in the, like not everyone in the breakout rooms.
Right.
Oh, that makes sense because we couldn't see stuff in when I was in a breakout session.
Yeah.
No, I feel terrible.
I think we could just bring everyone back then if that's how it's going to work. I think that we can just have a large group discussion and it should be fine.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a better answer.
No.
Don't be sorry.
We're all learning.
Yeah.
So the rooms will close in 56 seconds.
Okay. Sorry about that. I thought that if you put it in the chat, it would show up to everyone. I guess I was wrong, which almost never happens.
I mean, maybe they could see it. I guess we'll just have to ask them. Could you see the chat when he put, when Lee put the scenarios in? We weren't able to broadcast the entire scenario, which is why we're bringing everybody back. So I apologize about that.
Okay, let's do.
We could see the lines. We could see the lines coming in individually, but the entirety of the question was not showing up.
It would only let me send a few lines via broadcast, and it would just cut off in the middle. And we thought, okay, this is archaic. So let's just all get back together.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. I appreciate your flexibility and just like working with Zoom. UW-Oshkosh doesn't let us use Zoom, and so I'm like pretty unfamiliar with how to use it. But I mean, if we were at Microsoft Teams, there is nothing that I couldn't do. Just kidding. Okay. Has it been 56 seconds? What is time? I don't even know anymore. All right. I'm like, ooh, yeah.
Hello, this is Danielle. I'm gonna turn the camera on. Hi. We were in our little chat room. We were just starting to get into the discussion, and then all of a sudden we weren't able to discuss anymore. That's okay though. We got a couple little ideas thrown around a little bit, so that was good.
We we weren't able to share the scenarios in the chat in the way that I thought we would be able to, so we sort of moved it back for larger group discussion. So I think that that's what we'll do, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, sounds perfect to me.
Okay.
I appreciate this presentation, by the way. It's very interesting to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. I actually work in the LCO Ojibwe College. I'm born and raised on the LCO Native American Reservation up near Hayward, Wisconsin. And so, you know, there's a whole lot of tension right now, I guess is a word to say. And it's kind of always been there, but it's kind of seems like it got a lot better until recently, and now it's back again.
Yeah.
Not as bad as it used to be when I was young, though. So I can say that things have, I mean, I really believe in my heart things have progressed in a good way over since I've been a little girl. So that's always hopeful to know, to think about, to feel. And there's a little bit of a regression right now, but I think not everybody and just some people and things are still moving forward. So I don't know. Like I said, I appreciate this presentation. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for your words and for sharing. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So I would like for us to use some of this time to really think through these scenarios and the ways in which time allows. So this first scenario, just as a refresher, is about a graphic design student getting paid $10 an hour versus the other two positions getting paid $8 an hour, and students feeling the pay is racist. And then Courtney explains the rationale behind the pay scale, but ultimately leaves that conversation feeling even more frustrated. So the questions are, what are some of Courtney's assumptions about the supervisees? What might Courtney's supervision strategies be so ineffective? How are Courtney's strategies grounded in white supremacy? And what would you suggest Courtney change about her behavior? So what are some of the thoughts that people have or had around this scenario and relationship to the questions?
I think one of the first things we talked about in our space was that Courtney's really assuming that all of her students have the same access to learning those graphic design skills. And when we live in a society that is steeped in white supremacy, that there's just going to be folks who, because of systemic issues, aren't going to be able to have those same skills. And so looking forward, Courtney could move towards being able to teach folks that graphic design position and not making it as though it's higher than because other folks aren't able to get that same training.
Or even offer professional development for students that want to learn that skill or have been trying to and don't have access to it. And I also wonder, is there an assumption that these students don't already have those skills or maybe didn't take, I'm wondering if that question was asked, have you taken graphic design classes already? Is this something that you want to learn more about? Let's get you some more experience with that so you can get the compensation that you need and to live, because that could also be an issue that maybe there's an assumption that they're feeling valued regardless of pay because it is this hierarchical structure, which is an issue in and of itself. So I'm wondering if they're not feeling validated in other areas.
I guess the thing that struck me as I was reading through this is that it felt like Courtney was basing pay amounts on what her skills were, as opposed to what equal skills are. So that was what struck me, that it's really not, pay in a position should not be based on what a supervisor thinks is harder for them to teach. It should be based on what the actual level of work is and skill that is needed. For instance, I would feel pretty comfortable and confident teaching somebody how to do graphic design stuff, but I would not feel very comfortable and confident teaching somebody how to run a food pantry. I don't have those skills. So, but I'm not going to base that decision on my skill. I'm going to look at what is the norm? What should we be doing based on the actual skill level needed? And I think that would be a better argument. And maybe there are some things out there like that. But then I think you've got that cross piece. Is that based on a previous white supremacy type of decision, or is that a legitimate, this is a significantly greater skill? So I think for me, it was more about thinking about how do we value the skills that people have, as opposed to, how come this person gets more than this person? And bringing several people to the table to make those decisions becomes pretty important, so that you aren't biased in how you do that.
Absolutely.
I just want to add, because over here where I work, I do internships. We have all our internships paid at the same rate, regardless of what they're doing, because they're all in an internship and learning the processes. We don't have a whole lot of internships. We have a very few, but I think having that, and we work with our HR department very closely in determining all of this. So, and HR has a pay scale and things like that. So I think that's really important to build those policies into the overall structure of the programs, so that when there's questions coming forth, you can, it's not just somebody making up an answer on the spot. They can move to policy and say this is how and why it's done the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that these are all really good thoughts. I mean, some of the things that I'm hearing is like, right, like what skills are valued, who values them, like where do we place value, why is that important? Another thing, and this too is like that I notice a lot, is that like, particularly for people who come into these roles, it's like, well, this is the way that these roles have always been paid, and so like I'm not going to change that. Well, why? Right? Like, I think it's really easy to just be in like, well, this is how much they're paid, and like this is how it's always been, and so why change it? But yeah, so those are all really great thoughts. Thank you so much. And then here I want to talk about the second scenario. So this is a reminder, this is the one about like productivity and like some things that Jordan is feeling is not signifying like work and production, and how particularly like in staff meetings, they're starting to feel frustrated that things aren't being done, things aren't being delegated, and that is met with resistance from staff. So the same questions here. So what are some of Jordan's assumptions? Why might their strategies be so ineffective? How are their strategies grounded in white supremacy? And what would you suggest they change about their behavior? So what are some of the things that people thought around that one? Oops, sorry. And I can go back to the scenario if people would like to see.
I'm wondering if there's an assumption about, because they're talking and not on their laptops, they're not being productive, but I'm wondering what they're discussing. And if that's being taken into account, because they could be discussing the task. And it just because they're not on their laptops doesn't mean they're not working. So I think there is that level, especially in the productivity area. If you're not glued to your computer and typing away, you're not working, you're not being productive.
Mm-hmm. And even more to that point, because this scenario, I've never been Jordan. I don't know. These scenarios aren't real. That would be weird. They're real. But, part of what is important in this scenario in particular is this office is a shared space, and it's an office that like lots of students gather and utilize. and they're talking to students and each other and like building and supporting community, and that is part of their job. And so like for us to think about how like there is no, and I think someone in the, yeah, Rachel said, aren't producing physical output or things that are like valued as tangible, right? Like that you're not turning in this document or like posting this on social media, but like you are like engaging in like the establishment and maintenance of community in this space. And that's like one of the most critical components of this space. Like they are working, right? Was part of I think what you're saying and the sort of dynamic in this scenario as it existed in the real world.
When I was kind of reviewing that Dismantling White Supremacy, the document, something in there about the paternalism and perfectionism. And I'm wondering, and I don't know it at all, but I'm wondering if maybe she's falling into those categories as well, thinking she knows and understands, but maybe she doesn't really know how to supervise very well. I don't know. So like you say, like was brought up, you know, just because they're sitting there talking and sharing with a group doesn't mean that they're not actually producing, but maybe that's where that, because a lot of things are, you know, like the tangible, there's so much that is not tangible, that is considered work, and that is very productive for, especially when in the roles that we're working in. Sometimes it's just sitting there talking with somebody that's going to be so productive for that student to maintain in college and, you know, beyond. So, I mean, I just think thinking about things differently also, what the important different aspects of work. I guess I'm losing my train of thought here. But I'm kind of onto something, but I don't really know how to formulate that thought. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, I'm with you. I think what I'm hearing from you is like I think for me, there's a questioning of like how Jordan thinks about productivity and like whether or not they have the ability to effectively supervise these three people based off of how they've thought about supervising, right? Like they're like, oh, well, I think that there's like in this maybe like a lack of adaptability in how you supervise people as like individuals and like the things that they need from a supervisor. Is that what you were thinking? Are we on the same page? Are we? Well,
pretty much, kind of, sort of, but also like, cause I'm a Native American woman of color, right? I've been in roles within my lifetime where I had non-Native white supervisors who did not take me seriously whatsoever.
Oh yeah.
Every time I said anything, every time I brought something forth, it was like, oh no, 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 or you know, whatever it was, there was a reason why it was wrong. And it just like their ears were closed to what I had to say and what I had to bring forward. So I'm wondering if maybe her ears are closed to these guys and she's not really thinking that they know what they're doing. And so if you, as an employee, when you feel that from your supervisor, you kind of close off to them. Why keep moving in that direction if they're not willing to listen? And you know that in this role, you're not going to be very effective, so you need to move on to another role. And so I'm wondering if maybe something like that is happening.
Oh yeah, and it probably just is. But yeah, thank you thank you for your thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is like some folks are in the chat saying like maybe it rooted in the idea of individualism and said they could discuss projects with students to work on as a team rather than individually. Also says that they are, relationship team building is productive, which it sounds like they are doing. It also seems like they are approaching it in a more accusatory manner. No eye contact can be a cultural trait. There's clearly a lack of trust, probably coming from power hoarding. I mean, all these things are just, I think, like dynamics of the scenario. I think all of these things are like really important and just true. But I know that it is 11:45, which means that the time of this session has ended, and I want to be respectful, and a steward of people's time. Thank you so much for coming. I had some time at the end for questions, thoughts, and action. If I'm able to, Tanya, if I have the ability to, I'll just stick around. If people want to like stay behind and chat or just ask questions or anything, but I'll be here. But thank you so much for being here today, everyone. I really, really appreciate your time. There is a program evaluation in the chat. If you could take the time to fill that out. I know everyone, and especially me, would really appreciate it. I'd love feedback and would love your feedback. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee. That was really great discussion. We really appreciate you facilitating that for us. This link is unique, so if you do want to stay on and folks want to continue the discussion, feel free to do so. The next session starts at noon. If you want to pop onto one of those, please fill out the conference eval. I keep putting it in the chat in between all of the wonderful applause and thank you for Lee. That would be great if you could fill that out. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Colin, if you're still here, because I see your name, you put at 11:40.